I think the minute infidelity enters into a relationship, the betrayed partner often feels an enormous amount of shame. Carried shame is when somebody else has basically acted outside of their value system and done something offensive, and yet the shame from that comes over onto you. You haven't actually done anything wrong, and yet the shame from the cheating and the behavior comes over, and you start to carry that shame, and it starts to affect how you think about yourself, what you believe about yourself, how you act and operate in the world, because now you're kind of awash in that shame. That's what carried shame is, and I think every betrayed partner deals with it. I was taught about carried shame by Pia Melody way back many, many years ago, and Pia has a great saying that you can't heal carried shame because it belongs to somebody else. The only thing you can do with carried shame is to give it back.
We'll make it out and fall in love tonight.
I just want to start off by saying that on today's episode, we are going to get into some topics that might be triggering. So we have Michelle Mays on the episode, and we are going to speak about infidelity, betrayal trauma, possibly some addictions. So if you are in a space where you're experiencing any of these, or these are raw for you, just remember, hit pause on the podcast, take care of yourself. You can always come back or let it go if it's not where you're at. So take care of you while you're listening. And on today's episode, as I said, we have Michelle Mays. She is a licensed professional counselor and expert in treating sexual betrayal and trauma. She is the author of the book, The Betrayal Bind, and has created the attachment-focused partner betrayal model. In order to address the devastating dilemma that betrayed partners face when their significant other is unsafe to connect to, and yet connection is the key to healing. Michelle, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being here. And we are so excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
One of the things that just stood out to me about you the most is you came across my feed in YouTube, and I don't remember who you were speaking with, but you had another person on your that you were speaking with that was she was doing a great job going through the experience, talking about what it's like, her experience with betrayal and infidelity. And she was also an approach of somebody that was helping other people. And the focus a lot of times these conversations go really shame-based. They're really intense in you're bad, you're wrong, you're broken. And I really felt resonation with the way that you were like this light on this podcast. You were like this light on this episode that wasn't pointing a finger. You were looking at this picture. You weren't using shame-based tactics, and you could see an entire picture of what happens for both partners, for both people, for everybody involved, without placing blame, shame, or judgment. It is what it is. You're in that space. And so as soon as that approach came through, I'm like, I want to talk to this woman, and started listening to more of your stuff, and was able to get your book and listen to that, which was also quite the eye-opener. So if you wouldn't mind talking about what led you here and where this piece of your heart came, where you decided that you were going to help people.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people come to this field of work through their own journey, and I'm no different. I came through my own journey. So I, many years ago, was in a marriage to somebody who was sexually addicted. And I was very young and oh so naive and didn't know what I was dealing with in any way, shape, or form, but also the field had not developed yet. And so, today I think when we say sex addiction, people have an idea of what that is. It's in our common lexicon in a way that it didn't used to be. Back then, that was just not true. Treatment professionals didn't understand it or know what it was. And so I spent a lot of time in pain and wandering around trying to find help, and often found myself finding people that actually hurt more than they helped. I found people that actually helped me get sicker rather than get well. So I just had that experience at that time. And then eventually I did find really good help, and I did get really good support, and I was able to really walk through my own process of healing. And that all kind of coincided with me also going back to school and getting my degree in counseling, that I found the good help, and that coincided, which was a really nice thing for me. And so when I came out of school and I started my private practice, I really wanted to work with uh, people who had been dealing with betrayal in their relationships. And I really had this like, we've got to do better. We need thinking about this. It's different. We need treatment around this. It's different. Like this thing is not being, people are not getting the help they need. And I had just experienced that firsthand. So I entered the field, and shortly thereafter, I started seeing people who had been dealing, who were the betrayed partner. Then the person who was mostly, I was dealing with sex addiction at that point, who was addicted, started coming in to see me. So I went and got my uh, certification as a certified sex addiction therapist because I'm a big picture thinker. So I like working with the whole system and understanding all the moving parts in a relationship and how they're impacting one another. And so back then, I was also the only person in my county who was a certified sex addiction therapist. So I ended up often working with the whole relationship, both individuals, the coupleship, and I really got to learn and understand about the whole system and how it all works together and see all sides of it. And I really like working with that. And so I really learned about both pieces. But then I think a through line for me has been really, we've got to do better with helping betrayed partners. And so over the years of being in the field, I've been evolving my thinking around that and evolving to the point where I wrote the book and have a new treatment model for how we think about that and how we treat that issue.
Like throughout my life, I can think of how much I've heard about it's the person who's cheated's fault. It's they're bad. They've done this. It's because the person who was being cheated on, and those, like, for lack of a better word for that, is lacking. They've done something. All the shame that comes around it just really didn't focus on a core problem. It seemed to really focus more on like the shame aspect of it, and you want to hide it, you want to push away, and it just should stop. It just should like absolutely stop. Nobody should have to face it, do these behaviors. And it was a very closed-minded loop to where if you found yourself there, you didn't really have good resources. Like, am I talking about it? Am I not talking about it? Confusion over your own actions and why you made the choices that you made, even where you're at. So there's so much shame, and you really get into the carried shame on that, and also understanding the cycles that gets into it, which really opened up the window. Is like, I don't think I'm alone. And there wasn't a lot of information either. You said you were the only one in your field that said, hey, there's a lot more going on behind the picture. It's a lot more than you're right, you're wrong, your fault, you're not. You should do this, you shouldn't do that. And it's just, from what I've seen, it's just not talked about that much, that there's a whole other aspect on what's happening behind the scenes.
When you say behind the scenes, what are you thinking of there? What do you mean by that?
I'm thinking about the programs that we have inside ourselves on what comfort we're searching on, what leads us to certain behaviors, and how the shame that we're carrying within ourselves and why what we're trying to gain, what's being processed.
Like the like the unconscious actions
Yes.
that are kind of driving a lot of things in relationships.
And as well, absolutely. And as well as the cycles that the person goes through when they're trying to make sense of what just happened. The other parties of like, why am I behaving this way? This extreme situation happened. This, like, I feel so betrayed and I don't feel like I can talk to anybody. I feel like I've done something wrong. I have to change. All of the ways that you start to psychoanalyze yourself and put yourself into, I'm doing this wrong. I'm shameful. I don't have the tools. You don't know what's going on. You feel absolutely insane. And then you spoke to it so clearly in your book. You have, like, when you put it out there and people start to see information on, oh, I thought I was alone in feeling this. I didn't think what I was feeling was normal. I thought that I was the only one that experienced this. I can talk about this. Or it's just like the way that you opened it up. And how did you, like, I would love to hear more on that, on the cycles that you spoke of and founding them people in.
Yeah. So can I piggyback just on what you said first, and then I'll talk about that. But I just want to say too, I think that specifically what you said, I think, is really important about you're bad, you're not bad. When you're dealing with infidelity and when you're dealing with cheating, I think it's so easy for there to be like a you're the bad guy and I'm the victim and you're the offender. And I think we have to we thread the needle on that really carefully. Because the truth is, if you are the person who has cheated, you have created enormous harm. And there is enormous harm that has happened from it. But to your point and what you were saying, it isn't just about the behavior. Like, it isn't just about the infidelity behavior. It's about what was going on behind that for the person, how'd they end up there. So it is this whole bigger picture that is going on. And I think that has to be tended to and looked at in the whole thing. So I just want to say I agree with what you're saying there. It makes a lot of sense to me too.
Michelle, I have a question for you, if you wouldn't mind, because you mentioned, in apologies, because I know that there's a different subsect of training for sex therapists or sex addiction, right? If you wouldn't mind, take a minute and explain, because I think that a lot of people are probably, I know that I was at some point in my life, right, where I didn't have a good understanding of what sex addiction was. It kind of fell under the other umbrella of just addicts in general. And I don't know if I know that there's some similarities that can be, applied across the board, but at the same time, how is sex addiction different than regular, drug addiction or alcoholism or something like that?
One thing to just think about is we use the word sex addiction. You can also call it other things. There's a debate in the field about what are we calling this constellation of behaviors that people deal with. Some people call it problematic sexual behavior, hypersexual behavior, compulsive sexual behavior, sexual addiction. It's all, when you boil it down, we're dealing with the same constellation of behaviors for people. And what that is it's being caught in a cycle where you are using sex compulsively. So that can look like a million different things. Like, the behaviors, of course, can range from pornography addiction, where you're using pornography compulsively and looking at pornography many, many hours a day, et cetera, all the way to I'm compulsively having sex with anonymous strangers all the time. I'm engaging in high risk behavior. I'm engaging in paid sex. I'm doing it compulsively. And it's also outside of my value system. So what we're looking at there is a behavior that contradicts your own value system, that when you try to stop it, you're not able to stop it. You keep going back to it, even though you really don't want to, even though you've promised yourself that you're not going to keep going back to it. And that often escalates over time. So we see it go from, I look at porn an hour a day to now I'm looking at porn 2 hours a day to now I'm losing time and losing half a day sometimes. Or, I'm going to do this behavior and I find myself doing something far more extreme 2 months later, like the behavior has escalated. And so those are the things that make us look at it and say, okay, now we're dealing with something that is compulsive or addictive. And for the person that is using sex in that way, the way that I think about that is that it's kind of a three-sided triangle. So when you're using sex in that way, it does change your brain. So it does change your brain chemistry, because we're now preoccupied with sex. If you think about your brain as your biggest sexual organ, so the minute that you start to think about what you're going to do sexually, your brain is actually getting dopamine and becoming aroused by it. So you're spending a lot of time every day in an aroused state where you're sort of flushing dopamine through your brain at higher rates. All of that, then, of course, then when you do the behavior, it reinforces itself. And so it alters the brain. So there is that piece. The other side of the triangle is that it also becomes something that we're using to regulate our emotional selves with. So I get up in the morning, before I go to work, I have a high stress job. I get on the computer, I look at pornography, I masturbate. That calms me down. I feel like I can now go do my day. At the end of the day, I'm tired. I'm a little exhausted, so maybe I, on my way home, go to a massage parlor and feel taken care of or something, you know? So there's, again, all these different behaviors you can do there, but it's, I'm regulating my emotional self now through calming my nervous system or making myself feel alive. We can either bring ourselves up or down, right? Through using sex. So that's the other side of the triangle. The bottom of the triangle is, this is also now how I start to feel okay about my emotional needs. So we all have these needs to matter, to feel significant, to feel like we belong. And so for this moment, when I'm in the massage parlor and I'm experiencing this, I feel focused on, and I feel taken care of, and I feel like I matter. And so now I've also got my attachment needs, our deep emotional needs, being also met through this. So when we're talking about addiction, sex addiction, we're talking about something that has all those pieces. It's like changing the brain, regulating our emotional self, and also meeting some of our attachment-based needs momentarily. And all that is reinforcing and sends us back over and over and over again. So I don't know if that helps explain it.
For sure. Absolutely. I think it is beneficial, like I said, because I know that I was confused about it for a really long time and kind of ran it through the same filter that I did with, NA or drugs or alcohol or anything like that. Oh my goodness, I had a question that popped up right there at the end where it's gone.
It's okay. The way that I had never heard it before, I has described as it's meeting the addiction in itself is the sexualization of attachment needs and wounds. I had never heard it that way. It only had came across of, is sex addiction even real? Is it even a real thing, or is it an excuse so people can behave as they choose to and just say it's not my fault? And that was a big one. But then just like really understanding, oh, there's a need here. There's a wound. It's something that I hadn't heard.
That was my question. It was in relation to attachment. And I was hoping that you could get into a little bit more about how much, I mean, we don't have to go down the whole rabbit hole of like attachment theory and all of those type of things, right? But at the same time, how is that playing a role in when it comes to infidelity and everything like that?
So I think for everybody, and again, addiction and traditional infidelity are slightly different things. Let's just stay on,
Sure.
we'll just stay on the addiction topic since we're there right now. But to me, when I'm working with a client around, once we've kind of got the behaviors halted and we've got some other coping strategies that we're building in terms of how to manage your emotional self and regulate your body and take care of your body in ways that are helpful and supportive for you. Once we've kind of got that in place and we're starting to look at, okay, what's underneath this? Like what's underlying, and we're looking then more at those attachment-based needs, then we're really looking at how does this behavior answer something for you? Like the definition that we use at the Counseling Center for Addiction is that all addiction is an ineffective attempt at self-care. That it's really trying to meet your needs in a way that doesn't really meet them long term. But that's what you're doing, is you're trying to meet your needs, And so I think when I think about when I work with a client on this, often the question that I'm asking them as we're talking about their behaviors is, what changes for you when you're doing this behavior? What changes for you in terms of how you feel about you? So let me back up and just say this also, because when you're dealing with addiction and you're dealing with sexuality, there's a million different things you can be doing. And there's a million ways to combo platter everything together, And so I think for most people who are dealing with sexual addiction, it can feel like, oh, I just randomly do this behavior. But it's not actually random. We're really intentional creatures. Even when it's unconscious, where it's intentional. And so there's usually meaning to the behavior that we're doing. And in some way, we've chosen a behavior that answers an unmet need in us in some way. And responds to an unmet need in us. So for example, if I'm working with a client and I'm saying, what changes for you about how you feel about you? Let's do the massage parlor example. And I'm actually thinking about a client right now that I worked with years ago who had enormous abandonment in childhood, had enormous amounts of abuse in childhood, and had grown up. Their coping was to be like a rock star in terms of owning a business, taking care of people around them, taking care of people financially, taking care of people administrate. Like this person was like taking care of everybody and had learned to do that really, really young in their family to try to get attention from parents that were really, really harmful. And so grows up, becomes this adult who's just super overburdened by work and everybody who wants something from them, has this pattern of going to massage parlors compulsively. When we drilled down on that and asked, like, what happens when you're there? What's the point of highest power for you? That's the other question I always ask. What's the point of highest power for you in this experience? The point of highest power was I'm being focused on, and nobody needs anything from me. I get to feel for a moment that I get focused on, and it's about me, and I get my needs taken care of, and nobody needs anything from me. And for that person, that was like, oh, like balm for their spirit, and it touched the wounded part of them that needed to feel paid attention to and taken care of, and they couldn't figure out how to do that in their life, and their coping strategies were working against them. So because they couldn't do it relationally and they couldn't do it in their life, they had channeled it into their addictive compulsive behavior. So that's an example of your attachment needs getting met. And then how do you feel about you in that moment? Well, I felt like I mattered because I mattered enough to be taken care of. So now how you feel about yourself is also changing in that moment. Does that help with that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's a great example. It makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I like your distinction, like just for the clarifying, because you said at one point, there's a difference between infidelity and sex addiction, which absolutely, and correct me if I'm wrong on my interpretation on this. Infidelity is like a one-off event, something that happens, as to where an addiction is that compulsive behavior that continues on. Can you, like, just to help distinguish between the two of those? One isn't, not saying that infidelity or sexual addiction deserves more attention than the other. They are both incredibly harmful for everybody involved in that space. And there's a lot of repair work. But when we're trying to look at, is it infidelity? Is it addiction? Is it a one-off? Is there something that is a really deep core issue here that's going to take a lot more work? Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, are they always related? Do you always find them kind of, paired up together in a sense where you're going to, if you have infidelity, is there always going to be some component of sex addiction in there?
No, not at all. So what I would say is I don't consider infidelity to be just a one-off. So I would say infidelity is when you are breaking the sexual agreements in your relationship and going outside of the relationship, outside of the agreements. And that might happen once, that might happen twice, that might happen 3 times, so it can happen more than just it's a single time. But there isn't a compulsive component to that. So there isn't this like, I'm doing it, I've tried to stop it, I can't stop it, it's escalating, it's taking more and more of my time and attention, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when we're looking at infidelity versus addiction, we're really looking at that compulsivity piece to distinguish them. And there's plenty of people who engage in infidelity of some sort who are not in any way dealing with sexual compulsivity and dealing with sexual addiction. So they really are different things in that sense, and have to be kind of looked at differently.
Thank you for clarifying that. If you wouldn't mind getting into, you go into detail about the 3 types of core wounds that happen with betrayal. Would you be willing to start speaking on those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyone who's experienced betrayal, and this is whether it's infidelity or addiction, whatever it's related to, but if you've experienced sexual betrayal in your adult partnered relationship, you're going to have 3 wounds that are there for you. So the first one is an attachment injury. And an attachment injury is basically when your safe connection to your partner has been destroyed. So our attachment to our partner is our person in the world. You know, they're the person that we turn to for, we want to be around them. We feel like they provide safety for us. They're our launch pad out into the rest of the world, all those things. And betrayal takes that connection to the person and robs it of safety and now makes it highly uncertain and scary. So that creates an attachment injury for the person. The second injury is called the emotional and psychological injury, and this has to do with the deception that's always part of infidelity. So because infidelity and the breaking of sexual agreements, it's always happening in secret. You know, it's something that's going on without the awareness and consent of the other person. So that means that the person who's involved in the cheating is lying about it. And sometimes that's kind of simple lying, like I'm at work when I'm not. And sometimes it's super high level gaslighting that's going on. There's kind of a continuum there. But for every betrayed partner, what happens for them, because they've been lied to about this and it's been secret, and there's been this secret sexual life going on, for them, there's a huge emotional and psychological injury around their ability to trust, their partner, and also their sense of trust in themselves. Because there's also often this like, how did I not know that? How did I not pick up on that? How did I pick a person who would do this? It can also affect their trust with everybody else in the world, because it's almost like, you know, this was my person and they did this to me. So is everybody like this? You know, is anybody trustworthy? So that's a huge injury for them. And depending on the level of deception and gaslighting they've experienced, it separates them from their ability to know their own reality. And that creates a lot of emotional and psychological dissonance for them that they have to recover from. So that's the second injury. And then the third injury is a sexual injury. And because we're dealing with sex and we're dealing with sexual betrayal, it impacts the partner's sexuality. So the person who has been cheated on and experienced the betrayal, it often harms their sense of who they are sexually, their sexual self-confidence, their sexual self-esteem, their sense of, you know, I can engage in this relationship and feel safe and seen, and I can bring my authentic self to it. All kinds of things go on there in the sexual injury. So those are the three injuries: an attachment injury, an emotional and psychological injury, and a sexual injury.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. Whether you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the other many places where podcasts are available, take a minute and hit that subscribe button. We have a goal of reaching over 1 million people with this podcast, and we need your help. So if you're feeling extra generous, go ahead and leave a review, give us 5 stars, and then share your favorite episode with someone. All of these things help the podcast grow and expand and reach more people, which also helps us get better and better guests so that we can continue to bring you great episodes week after week. Thank you both for listening and just being you. We believe that healing is possible no matter where you're at on your journey, and we all do better when we heal together. Now let's get back to this episode.
We spoke on infidelity, sex addiction, how that comes into the space, the attachment wounds that that happen in that space. I would like to get into a little bit more of the carried shame that comes through on pushing, whether you're staying, whether you're going.
So carried shame is kind of an interesting animal, right? And I would say I've never really worked with somebody who is dealing with betrayal who doesn't have carried shame. There's something about being cheated on, experiencing infidelity, where there is sort of this automatic shame that washes over the person. That somehow I have done something to create this dynamic where my partner has cheated on me. And if you're female in our culture, I think I talk about cultural carried shame, because there's actually like this in our culture. It's sort of like If your partner cheated on you, well, why can't you keep your man if you're female? And then if you're female and you're the one who cheated, then it's like, well, what's going on there? You're now like there's the slut shaming piece. There's the. So it's almost like no matter what's happening, the female is getting blamed in the relationship culturally. There's a lot of cultural carried shame there. So because of that, I think the minute infidelity enters into a relationship, the betrayed partner often feels an enormous amount of shame. And carried shame is when when somebody else has basically acted outside of their value system and done something offensive, and yet the shame from that comes over onto you. So you haven't actually done anything wrong, and yet the shame from the cheating and the behavior comes over, and you start to carry that shame, and it starts to affect how you think about yourself, what you believe about yourself, how you act and operate in the world, because now you're kind of awash in that shame. So that's what carried shame is, and I think every betrayed partner deals with it to some degree. And I was taught about carried shame by Pia Melody way back many, many years ago. And Pia has a great saying that you can't heal carried shame because it belongs to somebody else. The only thing you can do with carried shame is to give it back and to not carry it. And it's making me think, I was just coaching somebody on Monday in our coaching program, and they were like, well, how do I get my partner to take their shame back? And I was like, they don't need to take it back. Like, they don't need to have anything to do with this. Like, this is you. It's like you've picked up a sack of rocks and you can put the sack of rocks down. Like, you don't have to carry it. It doesn't matter what your partner is doing. It doesn't matter if they are willing to own their part in things, not willing to own their part in things. It doesn't matter at all. You don't have to carry the shame from the behaviors that have happened. And it's your work to be able to release that and let go of it.
That's hitting. That carried shame cannot be healed because it isn't yours. The only thing you can do is give it back. Mm-hmm. I personally have spent, and it's in so many different areas of my life. I can apply that, not just in this, in that place that I have, like, oh, this is mine. This is my shame to heal. And no wonder it hasn't been working. No wonder I couldn't heal it because I was trying to do it instead of giving it back. That hits on such a deeper level.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, I mean, to me, when I was trained in this idea, it was, again, with Pia Melody and her developmental trauma model. And it was really looking at the carried shame that we experience in childhood. If our parents are not parenting us well, we often think that's happening because something's wrong with us. And so there's carried shame that's childhood carried shame. So that's how I learned about the concept, was really helping people work with that piece. But as I worked with betrayed partners, I'm like, this carried shame is right here in this adult dynamic as well and has to be dealt with.
I have a question for you. What is, like, you mentioned some of the things in society that are kind of like, what do we call, like stereotypes or things like that, right? What are some of the other things that are misunderstood when it comes to infidelity in relationships? What are some of the common things that people, think that just aren't true, that just aren't accurate? Like the common things that people, the misunderstandings.
Okay, so this one I hear a lot. It's really fun. It's once a cheater, always a cheater. I think that's not true at all. Now, I agree with it when the person who has cheated does no work on themselves and is not willing to take a good hard look at what's going on or repair, then yes, that behavior is pretty much going to repeat in that situation. But if the person is willing to look at, well, here's what happened, here's what's going on for me, let me really look at this and shift it and do the work around it, then that person's not doomed to repeat that. So I think that's something that I hear that I don't think is true. I think another thing that I hear, and this is actually really prevalent in the treatment field, in the couples therapist world, is that infidelity is a relationship problem. That if somebody is cheating, that means there's something wrong in the relationship.
Hmm.
And
I
therefore,
don't
go
keep
ahead.
going. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
You hear that like that? Because I think that's a big thing right there, right? I think that to me, that speaks volumes to speak more to that. Like if it's not a relationship issue, then what is it?
Yeah, well, so I would say this. There's research on this among couples therapists. That couples therapists have the belief that it's a relationship issue if there's infidelity. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it has nothing to do with the relationship. And there are actual studies on this. There's recent studies with people from Ashley Madison, and they've done some different studies of users on some of these websites and stuff who are like, yeah, no, I actually am really happy in my relationship. I'm cheating for other reasons. And I think when you start to work with people and you start to look at like what's going on underneath this behavior, it often has to do with sense of self, what's going on inside of them about how they feel about themselves, regulating, like managing stress, managing their own self-esteem issues. It can be all kinds of different things that aren't rooted in a relationship problem. So I think that is something we need to reevaluate. And I think the treatment field really needs to reevaluate it, and really think about how to look at that issue with a much broader lens and an understanding that people treat for much bigger issues. And I think that it doesn't work well to say to the betrayed partner, oh, hey, by the way, it's your fault that your partner cheated. You know, that is not a good approach, in therapy. And most betrayed partners are going to feel like now they've been hurt again, when that is the approach. But I will say this, and the research shows this, that this is the biggest approach that most couples therapists take on this issue.
Is approaching it as a couple issue?
A relationship issue, and it's both your faults.
Wow.
And so I think that needs to shift. Our thinking around that, I think, really needs to shift. So that's another one that I think is a common misconception.
One of the things that we've experienced in our relationship is recognizing that there's like phases of healing that take place. Like we're at a point in our relationship right now where we have we joke about it a lot sometimes because sometimes it feels like we have like a black belt in healing, right? And then the next day we're quickly reminded that we really don't, right? But there's definitely things that we're able to process and navigate and heal at this stage of our relationship than 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So when you see infidelity happen in a relationship, and I know that everything's different. I know that it's hard to always speak to, because generalities are really hard because there's so many unique factors with every couple and every relationship and every situation. But what are some of the general things that you see when it comes to kind of the journey of healing that takes place or that would need to take place, I guess, in order for two people to figure it out and make it work after something like this?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. It's something that I've been doing a lot of thinking about recently because I feel like as a treatment field, we kind of know how to work with a couple to some degree. We know how to work. There's room to grow on this for sure, but we know how to work with a couple in the initial crisis and aftermath of infidelity. And, during that period of time, often there's been a lot of egregious behavior in the relationship. There's been the lying, there's been the gaslighting, there's been the sexual betrayal. Maybe your health has been put at risk because there's been unprotected sex. There's egregious behavior that we're dealing with. And so to move us back towards safety, we have to do things like set some serious boundaries in the relationship, ask for transparency around things, so that you can know what's going on. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do to build trust. People often separate in the house. The sexual relationship can go on hold for a period of time. I kind of think of those as like, they're kind of the big guns that we use. They're the big hammers that we use in the early phases of things. And we're using those because we're dealing with behavior in the relationship that's been so damaging and has really destroyed the safety. I think what we're not as good at and that we need to grow on as a field is what comes after that. And what I see happen for a lot of betrayed partners in particular is they're sort of like in year 2, 3, 4, 5 of healing post betrayal, but nobody's told them what the skills are there. And so when there's a bump in the road, they reach for one of the big hammers. They're like, you go sleep elsewhere. You're kicked out of the bedroom, or now I'm not going to have any contact with you for a few days. There's just like, they're kind of going back and reaching for these big things that they needed in the beginning to reestablish some safety, but that are not relationship building and are not really relational. And so to me, I think where we need to grow as a field is really understanding how to help people with this latter healing, where it's latter stages of healing, where we really need relational skills there, right? We need to be able to talk to one another when we are highly activated. We need to figure out how to push pause together, know we're activated, know how we're going to come back and work it through once we've settled a little bit. We're going to give each other a little bit more grace around the activation. We're going to try not to do power over, power under moves. All of that stuff really needs to be learned, and people need help with it in the later stage of healing. Because if you go back for the big hammers and you keep using those, you actually kind of destroy your relationship. If you're down here in the later stages. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes total sense. And I like the way that you articulated it as well as kind of described it. I think that, oh my goodness, I'm having such a hard time today. I have the thought that comes to my head and then it immediately leaves.
This is a big topic. It brings up a lot. And so all these things that we're prepared to say, it's putting us in a bit of an activation space when you're hearing these things. And so being able to really grab your brain and work on, I know I'm struggling with it right now. So I think like this is, if you're listening to this, you might be like, what? This is a lot of information. I feel like we're going really fast. And
well,
I totally
just remembered.
that.
So this is
Okay,
great,
go.
baby. You keep sparking me, but because you mentioned like the pushing pause. That's one of the things that we implemented that a few years ago and just freaking love what it has done for our relationship and our ability to kind of like navigate those really difficult conversations that come up. And the way that you were describing like the, few years after the fact, having these skill sets to be able to navigate harder times together in a more connected way. I almost feel like those are things that need to be implemented from day one in relationships, right? Because it's not just those skill sets. Like we use the push pause all the time for all sorts of different things, for all sorts of different, types of difficult moments that we're in. But yeah, I just wanted to speak to that. I was like, that's a great one. We use that one all the time.
Yeah, it's a big one. I know, and we have a couples mastermind, and in there we are always talking about slow it down. Like the only way to learn new behaviors with one another and try to stay connected to one another in these moments of conflict or moments of high activation is to slow it way down and be like, let's take a moment, let's push pause. We're going to come back to it. We always talk about you can't push pause and disappear. There has to be like a coming back. But then let's slow it way down and not come back and just go back into our activation. Let's slow it way down and really think about how are we in, what's happening for each one of us, what's getting activated in each one of us, why are we getting activated in that way? And let's just slow it down and try to see what's happening here. And I think when you can really slow it way down, you can make different kinds of progress than if you push pause and just come back and are off to the races again,
Yeah, in the beginning when we were practicing it, it was a lot of like, hey, we're pushing pause. 2 minutes later, we would still engage. Like, no, we were pushing pause. And then like we could hold out for like 5 minutes and then we'd come back. And it took a lot of practice. And we like the other thing that we do is whoever pushes pause is the one that has to bring it back up. They have to be the one that comes back to the conversation and says, okay, I've taken the time to regulate enough to the point where I'm able to like bring forth enough of my capacity to have a conversation now. I had a question that popped in my mind as well that I want to run past you, because a lot of what Steph and I work on together is it's like we're on our own little individual healing journeys, but then we also have our relationship that has a lot of stuff that has to be healed. And especially on our own individual paths, so much of the work that we're doing right now is reflecting back into childhood and seeing how all of this stuff in childhood is affecting us in present life and vice versa and so on and so forth. Do you see, and maybe there's studies, maybe there's statistics on it, but if you're in a relationship where infidelity has happened and taken place, is the likelihood that that has played out in some way? Because we're seeing our relationship get mirrored through the lens of our parents' relationships in some ways, right? It's a shade of kind of like the dynamics in some ways. And so is it common to find that if you were cheated on, or if you're the person that was cheating, that that was behavior that you picked up in childhood in some way, even if it was in subconscious ways where maybe it was going on in the house, but it wasn't talked about, or has that not really been dissected enough?
I think it's different for different people. You know what I mean? Like, I know a lot of people who are dealing with either cheating themselves, or they've become addicted to sex, and they had a sexually addicted parent, or they had a parent who was cheating. I know a lot of people like that. I know a lot of people that don't have any of that. I think the thing that is the through line and the common denominator is that everybody has unmet needs from childhood. And everybody has ways they've learned to cope with those unmet needs that are often not serving them well in their adulthood. And I think that's just the state of being human, is to have that and have to then work that through in your adulthood. Like, okay, the whole world is not my family. How do I start to do this differently? And I think when cheating comes into play, there's usually some element of meeting those unmet needs, of some element of the wounding from childhood is often playing some role in that, but it doesn't always go back to, well, this was modeled in my family. It's not kind of that direct, if that makes sense.
Go ahead, babe. What were you going to say?
Say well, if you had something, go, because I think
No,
mine's going to be a little bit of a backtrack.
Do it.
A little bit of
I do want to mention, I love that you talked about earlier how all addiction is us trying to get a need met, right? And I think that's a really good lens to look at it through. I have addiction issues galore, right? And the more that I'm able to look at that through that lens, is it's like, what am I trying to satiate right now? What am I trying to fix or solve? And the majority of the time, it's emotions. I mean, it's almost always something emotionally within me, right? Very rarely is it like some physical thing that I need a fix of. It's what am I feeling internally within me? So I love that you brought that up earlier and then mentioned it again. But go ahead, babe.
My circling back a bit is, so we've got through this. We've had discovery. We understand what's happening in the space, and we've decided to stay together. So you have the couple that's like, okay, here we are. Everything kind of blew up, and now we're going to start repairing. We're going to start recovering. And one of the things that has been experienced but caused more damage without knowing or having awareness of your behaviors was that push-pull dynamic, that I want to be close, and then you get close, now get away. So it's that fear. I want to be close, but I'm afraid to be close to you. So then I start to push you away. And then the other partner that is like, oh, they want me close, I'm coming close. No, they don't want me close. Back away. What do I do? Am I coming? Am I going? I want you here, push away. And it just starts to kind of flip to where nobody knows what they want from themselves, from their partners. How do you address that and that very common dynamic that happens? We just wanted to take a moment and hit pause on this episode and thank you so much for listening. We have a goal of reaching over 1 million people, and we need your help to do it. If you could take a moment, go to YouTube, search out Steph and Craig, and hit subscribe, that would help us a lot. Also, if you shared the podcast, maybe even this episode, that would help us reach our goal. And while you're there, check out all our other episodes and the many, many clips that we have. Again, thank you for your support. Thank you for being here. And we believe that healing is possible when we all do it together. And now, back to the episode.
Yeah, so you're describing what I call attachment ambivalence. And let me just get a little like why this happens, because it's super common. post betrayal for everybody to experience this, which is, and this is a bodily based thing that is happening. So what is happening is the way our attachment system functions is our attachment system fires inside of us and it prompts us to move close to the person who is our primary person, our primary attachment figure, who's our partner. So when we experience stress, like if we have a hard day at work, our attachment system is like, text your partner, call your partner, tell them what's happening. It prompts us to reach for connection to our person, because that's how we will feel better. Our nervous system will regulate. That's how we feel better. So that's our attachment system. That's the prompting that it gives us. Our threat response system, of course, when we're afraid and when we feel threatened, does fight, flight, freeze, right? It does those three things, and fawn if we want to talk about that one, but it does those things. And so often when we're experiencing threat and it's like either fight or flee, we actually want to somehow get away from the threat. We're going to fight it off or we're going to run away from it. And so usually in normal life, our threat system and our attachment system sync up really well. Because again, stressful day at work, call my partner. Threat system activated, reach for support, reach to my person. What happens in betrayal is that these two systems come into conflict and they're, again, bodily based systems. So now in our body, we have two things happening at the exact same time, and they're contradictory. So we've got, oh my goodness, I'm in the worst pain of my life because I just discovered that I've been cheated on. I'm in like enormous panic, enormous anxiety, enormous distress. My attachment system says, reach for your partner. They're your person. They're who you go to when you are in distress. They are going to comfort you and help you. Reach for them. But our threat system is like, hey, that's the person that puts you in distress. That's the person that's caused the harm. Get away from them, right? Get some distance, get some safety. Like they are the danger. So these two systems are now not cooperating well. They're now in opposition to one another, but they're firing at the exact same time. And it's, again, this is in our body. It's not something we're making up in our heads, And so what that looks like is exactly what you described. It looks like, hey, I want to be close to you. I want you to like hold me. I want you to talk to me. I want you to connect with me in some way to help make me feel better. And then it's, I hate you. Get away from me. You hurt me. Don't come near me. And so it's those two reactions in different levels of severity. Of course, it changes that the person is experiencing. And the first thing I wanted to say about this is it's normal, 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 normal. There's nothing wrong with you. Your body is just working the way it's supposed to. And you're caught in the very unique dilemma that happens in betrayal, which is that your person is also the one who's caused you harm. And that's the unique thing about betrayal. And that's the unique binds that are created by betrayal, is that now I've been hurt by the person that I actually need the most. So it's normal. What I always want my clients to do when they're dealing with that push-pull and all of that, moving around the cycle, is number one, stop judging themselves for it. Kind of relax about it a little bit. This is normal. This is the way your body functions post discovery of betrayal. It's okay, And then I really want them to start to be aware of where they're at in that dynamic, and start to be able to articulate their needs. So, for example, you both come in the door after work, and betrayed partner is like, hey, I have spent all day raging in my head at you and thinking about how angry I am about what happened. I have been angry all day, and I'm going to need some serious space this evening. I need some room. I need some time to myself. I need to not really engage. And rather than pick a big fight with you, I'm just going to tell you what I need. Okay. And so I want my clients to be able to start to articulate, oh, here's what's happening for me Right now, I'm in the I need room. So let me ask for what I need. Let me get myself what I need. Or come home from work and, hey, I have been so sad all day. I've been thinking about this. I've been sad. I felt lonely. I felt disconnected. I need some comfort. Can we go for a walk together? Can we sit and talk? Can I in some way have some connection? Can you hold me for a while? Can I have some kind of connection that will make me feel a little bit more grounded and safe with you tonight? Could I have some of that? Could I get some of that? So what I want is for my clients to start to learn what's happening for them, become aware of it. So they're not just, because it's bodily, it's happening whether we understand it or don't understand it. I want everybody to understand it and then be able to ask for what they need instead of, because what happens when we don't understand it, we're not aware of it, we just act it out. So we're acting out big fights to push away or big fights to try to get the person to come closer. We're doing a lot of just acting it out without knowing why we're doing it. And we start to feel kind of crazy inside ourselves. So I want everybody to understand it, know what it is, and then be able to ask for what they need and start to figure out, here's what I need right now. Here's where I am right now with this.
I have a quick question for you. What would be some green flags that people could look for post infidelity, post cheating, to know that things are on the right track? Because I think that it's probably a very stressful time period and you don't have your full capacity, right, to see things clearly. What are some things that people could look for to know, oh wait, I can start trusting this person, or this person is taking the steps that they need to repair the relationship?
Okay, so this would be for a couple who's staying together, I'm assuming, like they're
Yes.
trying to repair. Okay.
Yes.
So I would say a couple things just for the betrayed partner themselves. I would want them really focused first on learning to trust themselves before they even start to think about the partner. So I would want them really thinking about, am I clear about what's happening in my reality? Am I paying attention to what my gut is telling me? Am I looking at any place where I've been trying to kind of avoid reality because it's been really painful? Am I working with myself on that to just stay grounded in reality and really start to trust myself and trust what I'm seeing and trust what I'm knowing and trust what I'm understanding about this? So I would want them really working on that piece first and then looking to the relationship and saying, okay, here's what I need to see in the relationship, right? I need to see consistency and congruence are kind of the two big things. I need to see my partner leaning into repair, leaning into taking responsibility, leaning into honesty, and I need to see consistency around that. I don't need to see perfection because perfection's not coming, but I need to see consistency. I need to see that there's a consistent pattern of, I understand what has happened here. I understand the harm. I'm willing to take responsibility for that. I'm willing to listen to what has happened to you as a result of what I've done. And I'm willing to show up with like congruence between my behaviors and my words. So in what I'm saying and then what I'm doing, there's congruence. So there isn't, yeah, actually, I think it'd be super important to go to therapy and think about this too. And I never actually go to therapy. Or, yeah, I want to stay with you and I want to repair the relationship, but no, I'm not willing to actually do any work on it together. I think we should just get over it together. That's inconsistent. That's incongruent. So you're really looking for congruence between my intention is to repair the relationship and move forward, and I'm doing the behaviors that indicate that reflect that.
I really wanted to touch on that part, so I'm glad we were able to go there. Knowing what's going on in your body, knowing your response, having an understanding of it, knowing that you are normal is so helpful instead of feeling like you're absolutely crazy. When you're like, oh, this is a physical response. Now I know that there's a need and I can start to name it. I can start to express it. I can start to ask for it. And that doesn't mean that your partner has to be able to jump through every hoop and give you that, but you can ask for it. You have words to it and you know what you need for yourself, as well as your partner having an awareness too. If you're working on it together, you both are willing to look at it from your internal work and each other's point of view and understanding, okay, they're feeling a pull, they're feeling a push, it's going through. I know where I'm standing on this because I'm feeling into myself on this, and I can understand their expression of behaviors coming out through this. So having that awareness is huge. You don't feel like you're crazy, your partner doesn't feel like you're crazy or that they're going crazy. And then that deep willingness to start to trust yourself, to really dig in, trust yourself, be able to listen to yourself, sit with yourself, and then watch your partner, not watch, that's a not a good way to say it, but be willing to witness your partner making the steps. When you can trust yourself, you can see, okay, they really aren't making an effort, instead of the stories that you're telling yourself or the blind that you're putting up. And then you are able to see all the ways that they are making an effort. They are taking the steps. They are working on their healing because you're seeing past the trauma. You're seeing past the wall that you've put up and you can't see through, because what happens when you start seeing through that, you get nervous about what you might find. So really trusting yourself, learning about yourself, learning about your experience, getting safe help, not somebody that's going to help. Like you said at the beginning, what was it? Make you sicker?
Mm-hmm.
Make you sicker by like spinning you out in one direction or another.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much, just talking about it. I think finding that safe place to talk about it is such a big deal. I'm really glad that you wrote this book. I'm really glad that you're putting your information out there, because it's putting names to things that a lot of people haven't had names for it. They didn't even know to look. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah,
think it's far more complicated than I think, infidelity is kind of ubiquitous in our culture. There's a lot of it. And I think because it's a common experience, it can be minimized in terms of how devastating it is, how much impact it has in people's lives. It's almost like, well, it happens all the time, so we don't give it a lot of weight. And yet it's an incredibly weighty issue for people. And it's very complicated because when you experience those three injuries we talked about earlier, you're in the middle of a trauma, right? Your body is responding as though you are in the middle of a trauma. And what all the trauma treatment research and field says is part of treating trauma is the person knowing the trauma is over and that they're safe. And effective treatment often can't really happen until that is established. And yet, when we're working with infidelity, the trauma is often ongoing. There's often multiple discoveries that are happening, multiple things that we're finding out over time. So the trauma is ongoing and the safety isn't there. And we're trying to do treatment in the middle of an unfolding, ongoing trauma. And that is super complicated and super complex. And it's complex for the person who is suffering from the trauma, and it's complex for the treatment professionals and the helpers. So I think it's really important to understand that and to know, like, this is really difficult, challenging, delicate work that's being done.
that really takes the pressure off of it too. Like understanding that you are still in active trauma.
Yeah.
You're not healing this. We're working on the process of what is happening right now. That's like, that's almost a relief. Like, okay, I don't have to fix it all right now.
It's
We
so
can like,
hard. Yeah.
right,
There's a reason why it's so hard. Yeah.
right, there's
Yeah.
space there.
Mhm.
So we've mentioned your book quite a bit throughout because it's a great book. Would you tell us about your book?
So it's called The Betrayal Bind: How to Heal When the Person You Love the Most Hurts You the Worst. And it is really laying out an attachment based focus on looking at what happens to the betrayed partner, and what goes on for them when they've experienced betrayal, and what happens to your attachment system, and all the different binds that come out of the dilemma of your person who you love the most and need the most is the person who betrayed you. So the book kind of walks through those vines and how to heal and all of that.
And what else do you have? How else can people find you and get help from what you're working on and what you're offering?
Yeah, so you can go to michellemais.com, and that is the website for our coaching organization. And we have a coaching program for betrayed partners called Braving Hope, Become the Hero of Your Betrayal Story. And so if you're interested in that, you can go look at the website, and there's like a free masterclass to watch and all of that kind of thing on there. And then I also founded a counseling center local to Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C., called the Relational Recovery Institute, and that's at relationalrecovery.com.
Okay. What does it look like to work with you in that coaching program, whether it's the treatment center or with you one-on-one? What does that look like?
So I'm not doing a lot of one-on-one at this
Okay.
point. So the coaching program is a group-based coaching program, and you come in and you go through. It's a little bit of a different animal because what we're working on in there, I always say information does not create change. So we're not just giving you a bunch more information. The whole point is for you to come in and understand the things that actually block healing, which are usually either fear, shame, or powerlessness. So I think a lot of people sit in therapy and it's like, hey, here's how you set a boundary. Awesome. But they're not setting the boundary because they're afraid to. There's fear blocking that, or there's powerlessness. So often you're being given tools, but nobody's really looking at like what blocks you. What blocks you from being able to use the tools and implement and make the choices that move you forward. So what we're really doing in there is helping look at those blocks and help people take action and move through the fear, move through the shame, move through the powerlessness. And in doing so, they're reclaiming their sense of self. So it's a little bit of a different animal in terms of how we do the work in there. But there's that. And then I have the couples mastermind that I run with a colleague, Bruce Butler, and we work with 10 couples for a year. In that mastermind, we take them through a whole year together, they fly in and do intensives with us. We work with them online, all of that kind of thing. And then the counseling center, I have a team of folks that are doing one-on-one with people.
That's so awesome, Michelle. It all sounds amazing. We're going to include all of those in the show notes and everything like that, the links. We always wrap up every episode with a tagline. It's expect the best.
Plan for the greatest.
Say that again. Expect the best.
Plan for the greatest.
Plan for the greatest. That's awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Wait and see, you and me, we were meant to be.
We want to make something perfectly clear. This podcast is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as a substitute for professional advice. We're sharing with you our own personal experiences and insights, things we have found to be helpful on our healing journey. But we are not licensed therapists. If you need help, it's important to seek out a qualified professional. Remember, we believe that we all do better when we heal together. See you soon.